All right, let's rock. This is the organization of life, not how to organize your life, although we all need that at times. I know I do. No, this is about how life is organized in the world that we live. So far, we have not learned about that yet, and here we go. So, what we have learned about this year is how the body is organized. Remember this, we start with a cell, the basic unit of structure and function in all living things. And whether it's made of one or many, well, let's have an example of a many-celled organism, a multicellular organism. Those cells then work together, and when they work together, they form tissues. It could be cardiac muscle tissue as pictured above, but those tissues are a bunch of cells working together. We've learned this before, that organs are a bunch of tissues working together, such as your heart. Many tissues working together form an organ. Those organs in the same system working together are an organ system, like the cardiovascular system that you see pictured up above. And getting more general, larger and larger, we finally get to the organism, how the body actually works and what the body needs to survive and reproduce. So that's where we've been at so far, and we've learned a lot about a lot of organisms. And now, these individuals that we know about, we are going to send them out to the world. It's going to be amazing. How do these individual organisms, when sent out in the world that we live, how do they operate? How do they live? And you'll find that there are many, many interactions with other living things and non-living things out there on this earth. So that's what this video is going to be about. The organization of life. So how we organize this moving forward from individual species to how they find their own niche and place in the world or ecosystem. So here we go. We start with an individual. If we have a bunch of individuals, or at least two or more individuals living in the same area, that is called a population. So we're moving out further and further. So a group of individuals, a certain species in the same area interacting with each other, that is a population. Pictured here you can see several populations of a certain species that are living in the same area and interacting with each other. There's a herd of buffalo. Looks like a roundup out in South Dakota. Here's a school of tuna fish. Here are a few quaking aspen trees out in nature, interacting with one another, competing with one another once in a while. And then there's a bunch of rabbits. Now, population ecologists would study why these populations might grow in number over time or shrink. And they would study the conditions that are present that might affect those things. Is there a disease that inhibits the growth of rabbits over a certain number of organisms in a certain area? Is there a limited amount of food in the area? Perhaps there's a lot of predators, and we'll get to that. Are there enough nutrients in the soil to supply these trees to allow them to survive? So that's what we're looking at when we look at a population. We're just looking at one species and seeing how they interact with each other for the resources necessary to survive and grow or shrink. Now, we're going to go beyond population ecology and go further to something called a community. A community is when you have several different populations of different species then interacting with each other. It's kind of like a neighborhood. There are different people living in your neighborhood or in that community, and they're constantly interacting with each other, providing services for each other, and being neighbors. Now, one different thing than that you might not think of in a neighborhood that doesn't happen, thankfully, is that in a community in the wild, sometimes the neighbors eat each other. There are predators out there, wolves, dingoes. That's not the only two predators, but I'm drawing a blank. Oh yes, orca whales, bald eagles. There are predators out there that catch prey. That would be an interaction of a population of wolves, perhaps, interacting with the bird that he is catching, the prey. Ecologists would study that. How does one species or population interact with another species in that same area? Sometimes it's not predation. Sometimes they're competing for resources. Sometimes they help each other out, like this sea anemone interacting with that Nemo-looking fish, a clownfish. All right, moving even further out, although not like necessarily a larger area from community, the next thing we'll learn about is an ecosystem. Now, an ecosystem is a lot like a community. We are looking at populations of different species interacting with each other, but now with an ecosystem, the thing that makes it different than a community is that we're also looking at the non-living parts of the environment. Okay, so we're starting to look at precipitation, the presence of water. We might look at the soil. We might look at the salinity of the water in the ocean or another body of water. But any non-living part of the environment can have a huge impact on the living species that are interacting with each other in that community too. So the non-living and the living parts of the environment interacting with each other is an ecosystem. Pictured here is a map, an overhead view of one of the most famous ecosystems we have in North America and the world, and that's the Yellowstone National Park area. So there is an ecosystem where organisms are interacting with each other and accessing the resources, the non-living resources that they need to survive as well. So that's the next level up. Even further out, and now this is a larger area, we are going to talk about biomes. Biomes are a group of ecosystems. So ecosystems is smaller in this case, but biome is a group of ecosystems with similar climates and organisms, and these can be found throughout the world. What you see here are a lot of terrestrial or land biomes that are present all over the world. In yellow, this would be the tundra, temperate grasslands. We've got a taiga or coniferous forest in green. So this is all dependent, at least on land, on how much precipitation or rain that the area gets, combined with the temperature. So the combination of different precipitation levels and temperature levels will indicate what kind of biome an organism would do well at. For example, if you go to Arizona, you'll notice there are a lot of cactuses there, and every organism that you'll find there is well acclimated to being in an area that is very hot, so temperature, and doesn't get a lot of rain, hardly any. It's really dry. So all of the organisms that live there, and there's a ton of them, that are well acclimated to that kind of biome. Those kind of organisms that you would find in the desert of Arizona would be very similar to what you would find in other desert areas besides this orange area in Arizona, perhaps in Africa or down in Australia, where you don't get a lot of water and or precipitation, and the temperature is really high. Aquatic biomes, like in the ocean, lakes, and rivers, are precipitation or the presence of water doesn't really change throughout the world, so there's a different kind of aquatic biomes are different. It doesn't really matter how much precipitation they get. They are in water all the time. Aquatic biomes, like in the ocean, shallow seas, deep water, lakes, rivers, anywhere you have an aquatic biome, that's not going to depend on precipitation. It would more depend on depth of the water and its salinity, or how much salt is present in that water. So why are these biomes and ecosystems, communities, and populations different from place or location to location? It's all due to biotic factors and abiotic factors. If you see those words, biotic would refer to the living part of, or living factors that could influence the biome or ecosystem. And then the abiotic factors are the non-living components that might affect a population, community, ecosystem, or biome. First, with the biotic factors, are there predators in the area? How much competition might there be for sunlight and food? How much food is produced there? So abiotic factors are a huge part of this too. So, and a huge reason why biome and ecosystem is different than other biomes and ecosystems. So precipitation is a huge factor. Temperature, we've talked about that as well. But sunlight, pH or salinity, the soil composition, how much nutrients are in that soil, the elevation above sea level, those are all non-living abiotic factors that influence or change an ecosystem or biome. And those are good to mention here. Now, there's one more thing, one more step we have to move out. When all the biomes are put together, what we have next is called a biosphere. All biomes put together are a biosphere. Another way to say that is it's the Earth. Earth is our biosphere, and that wraps things up for the organization of life. Adios.